There's a certain kind of quiet that hits when a car door slams and doesn't reopen. It's not just silence. It's realization. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I stepped out. I thought he just needed air, needed space. We'd been arguing, sure, but families argue. Then he reached across the seat and tossed my purse into my lap. "Mom," he said, jaw tight, eyes forward. "I can't do this anymore. Not 'we'll talk later,' not 'let's cool off.' Just that." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second I didn't see my son. I saw a man who had already made up his mind. "Do what?" I asked. "This," he snapped. "You living with us. The tension, the constant guilt. I'm done." We were parked on the shoulder of Route 47. Nothing but trees, fading daylight, and the hum of passing traffic. "And I don't have any money on me," I said quietly. He didn't respond. He just stared ahead. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You'll figure it out. You always do." And before I could process that, he pulled away. Just like that. No cash. Phone battery at 12%. Purse empty except for an old ID and tissues. And my own son disappearing down the highway. Like I was an inconvenience. He finally cleared off his schedule. I stood there longer than I'd like to admit. Part of me believed he'd turn around, that this was dramatic posturing, but he didn't. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't anger. It was relief. He felt relieved. You want to know the crazy part? I wasn't shocked, not completely. For months, his wife had been planting seeds. Maybe it's time your mom found her own place. We need privacy. It's not healthy for our marriage. Healthy. Funny word, especially coming from someone who hadn't worked in 2 years, but had strong opinions about my burden. I moved in after selling my condo, at his request. "Mom, it'll save you money. Stay with us a while." So I did. I helped with groceries, cooked dinners, paid part of the utilities when I could. But slowly the temperature changed. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Finances became private matters. And every disagreement turned into, "Mom, you're overreacting." Classic. Make someone feel like the problem long enough, and eventually they start apologizing for breathing. A pickup truck slowed beside me. I stiffened. You don't stand alone on a roadside at dusk and feel safe. The window rolled down. A man in his early 60s leaned over the passenger seat. "You all right, ma'am?" I almost lied. Said I was waiting on someone. But pride doesn't keep you warm at night. "My son left me," I said. He studied me for a second, not pitying, just assessing. "You got somewhere to go?" I shook my head. He nodded once. "Hop in." "Now?" I know what you're thinking. Stranger danger. But sometimes life doesn't give you good options, just necessary ones. I opened the door. His name was Walter. Retired contractor. Widower. Straightforward kind of man. Didn't ask invasive questions. Didn't lecture me. Just drove. After 10 minutes, he said, "You don't look surprised." That caught me. I'm not," I admitted. He glanced at me. "That's worse." Yeah, it was. He didn't take me to a shelter. He didn't drop me at a gas station. He drove me to a small diner off the interstate, bought me coffee, and listened. Really listened. And somewhere between refills, I told him something I hadn't admitted out loud. My son didn't just get tired of me, I said. He was scared. Walter raised an eyebrow. Of what? I looked down at my empty hands. Of what I know. And that's when the real story started. Walter didn't interrupt me, didn't rush me, just let the silence stretch until I was ready. You said he's scared, he finally said. Scared of what you know? I stared into my coffee like it might spell it out for me. My son isn't bad, I started. Then I stopped. That's the lie mothers tell themselves. He's not stupid, I corrected. Big difference. 3 months before he left me on that road, I'd been helping him sort through some paperwork, tax stuff, mortgage refinance, nothing unusual. He'd asked me to look it over because I used to work bookkeeping back in the day. Numbers never intimidated me. What did intimidate me? What I found. There were transfers, and small ones at first, from his business account to a personal holding account I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, he brushed it off. Short-term liquidity adjustment. I almost laughed. That's corporate speak for don't look too closely. The amounts kept growing. $8,000, $12,500, $21,000, always under reporting thresholds that would flag external review, but consistent, a pattern. And here's the thing about patterns. They don't lie. When I casually asked why his wife's name wasn't on that secondary account, he got defensive. Why are you digging? Digging. Funny word for reading documents he handed me. That was the first crack. Walter leaned back in the diner booth. So he's moving money. Yes. Illegally? I don't know, I said. But not transparently. And transparency is everything when you're running a small contracting business with 3 active loans. A week after I noticed the transfers, his wife, Jenna, started acting different, overly sweet, overly attentive. Maybe you shouldn't stress yourself with finances anymore, she told me one afternoon. I can help him with that. She can't balance a checkbook without a calculator app, but suddenly she wanted control. That's when I realized something. It wasn't just money moving, it was insulation. They were insulating something, and I was the loose end. You confront him? Walter asked. I nodded. Not dramatically, just one evening in the kitchen. I need to understand where this money's going, I said. His jaw tightened. Why? Because if the IRS asks, I don't know, isn't a defense. That's when he said it. You always think the worst of me. Classic deflection. Make the question about emotion, not evidence. 2 nights later, he suggested I take a break. Maybe visit an old friend. Maybe find an apartment. That was the soft exit plan. When I didn't bite, the temperature shifted. Conversations turned sharp. Doors closed harder. And then came Route 47. Walter stirred his coffee, slowly. You keep copies? That made me look up. Of the statements. I didn't answer because I didn't have to. His slight nod told me he knew. Smart, he said. I had taken photos of everything, transfer logs, account numbers, timestamps, not because I wanted leverage, because something in my gut told me this wasn't ending clean. "You think he's embezzling?" Walter asked. "Not from his business," I said quietly. "From who?" I held his gaze. "From his father's estate." And that's when the weight really settled in. My late husband left behind a modest but carefully structured inheritance. It wasn't flashy, but it was protected, trust-based. Distribution required dual signatures, mine and my son's. Except recently, I noticed something subtle. Electronic authorizations had been processed when I hadn't signed anything. At first, I assumed glitch. Then I assumed oversight. Now, I assume intention. Walter exhaled slowly. "That's not tension. That's motive." Exactly. If he needed full access to estate funds, and I started asking questions, what's the easiest solution? Remove the oversight. Remove me. "You go to the police?" Walter asked. "Not yet." Why? Because despite everything, he's still my son, and reporting him would light a match that can't be blown out. But getting left on the side of a highway, that was the match. Here's the twist, though. Kicking me out wasn't just emotional damage control. It was timeline control. Because 3 days from now, there's a scheduled asset restructuring tied to that estate trust. And if I'm not physically present to verify, the system defaults to his signature alone. Temporary authorization. Convenient. Walter's expression hardened. "He didn't just leave you," he said. "He displaced you." Yes, exactly. This wasn't anger. This was logistics. The diner lights flickered as evening deepened outside. "You got somewhere safe tonight?" he asked. I hesitated. "Not really." He stood, pulled out his wallet, and tossed a few bills on the table. "You're not sleeping in your car?" "I don't have a car," I said. He gave me a look. Exactly. He drove me to a small roadside motel. Nothing fancy, but safe. Before I got out, he said something that shifted everything. "You don't look like a woman who folds." I almost smiled. "I'm not." "Good," he replied. "Because if what you're saying is right, you've got about 72 hours. 72 hours before signatures finalize, before assets shift, before paper becomes permanent." As I closed the motel room door behind me, I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I plugged my dying phone into the wall, opened my photo gallery, and started organizing evidence. If my son wanted me out of the way, he should have made sure I had nothing left to lose. Because a mother you inconvenience is one thing. A mother you corner, that's different. And I wasn't just stranded anymore. I was awake. I didn't sleep much that night. Cheap motel mattress. Buzzing fluorescent light outside the window. The kind of place where the ice machine sounds like it's fighting for its life at 2 a.m. But my brain was louder. 72 hours. That's how long before the trust restructuring finalized. If my son executed that digital authorization without my counter-signature verification, the system would temporarily default to him as primary controller, due to trustee unavailability. Unavailability, funny word for left on the side of the highway. I sat at the small desk and opened my email. 2 unread messages from the estate platform. 1 marked, pending authorization, urgent. There it was, time-stamped earlier that afternoon, while I was standing on gravel watching my son's taillights disappear. That wasn't coincidence. That was choreography. And at 6:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Did you check your email?" Walter asked. I sat up straighter. "How did you?" "Check it." Click. He hung up. Now that got my attention. I opened the email fully. It wasn't just a restructuring, it was liquidation. Partial asset liquidation from a long-term conservative fund into a short-term capital account. High risk, high volatility, high stupidity, unless you were trying to move funds quickly before scrutiny. At 7:02 a.m., I received another notification. Login attempt from an unrecognized device. Location pinged 20 miles from my son's office. I didn't panic. I screenshotted, forwarded it to myself. Then I did something he didn't expect. I called the estate attorney. Not voicemail, direct line. "You remember the dual authentication clause?" I asked. "Of course. It's about to be tested." By noon, the attorney had placed a temporary hold on all pending transactions, pending identity confirmation. Legal, procedural, airtight. My son would find out soon, and when he did, he'd realize I wasn't stranded. I was positioned. At 2:17 p.m., he called. "Where are you?" he demanded. Not "are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Just logistics. "Safe," I said. "You had no right to freeze the account." "I didn't freeze it," I replied calmly. "The system did when irregular access was detected." Silence. Then, "You're blowing this out of proportion." There it is. Gaslight, minimize, redirect. "You left me on a highway," I said evenly. That feels proportionate. His breathing shifted, faster, less controlled. "You don't understand the strategy." Strategy. Interesting word choice. "Explain it to me," I said. He didn't, because he couldn't without admitting intent. By late afternoon, I was back at the diner. Walter was already there. Same booth, same calm posture. "You moved quick," he said. "You expected I wouldn't?" He smirked slightly. "No, I expected you would." That's when I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since morning. "How did you know about the email?" He took a slow sip of coffee. "Because I used to audit estate transfers." I blinked. "You're an accountant?" "Retired forensic auditor," he corrected. Well, that explains the questions. That explains the calm. That explains why he didn't flinch when I mentioned patterns. "You weren't just driving by, were you?" I asked. He didn't smile. "I was." Pause. "But I recognize displacement tactics when I see them." Displacement tactics. Corporate language for move the obstacle. Me. I was the obstacle. Walter leaned forward slightly. "Here's what he's doing," he said. "He's not stealing outright. He's repositioning liquidity. If the market swings right, he profits. If it tanks, he blames volatility. And if I'm not there to question it, he controls narrative. Exactly. This wasn't desperation. It was calculated risk-taking with someone else's safety net. My phone buzzed again. Text from Jenna. We need to talk. This is getting ugly. Ugly. Funny how accountability always looks ugly from the side of guilt. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the estate portal again. Another login attempt blocked. He was trying. Harder now. That told me something important. He wasn't confident. He was scrambling. Why risk it? I asked Walter quietly. He's leveraged, Walter said. Loan heavy? Yes. Market downturn? Yes. He nodded once. He's upside down. Needs capital to cover exposure. So this wasn't greed. It was survival mixed with ego, even more dangerous, because desperate men rationalize fast. At 6:42 p.m., my son showed up at the diner, alone. He looked exhausted, not angry, cornered. He slid into the booth across from me. You're humiliating me, he said quietly. No, I replied. I'm verifying transactions. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't get it. If this doesn't go through, I lose everything. Everything, meaning business, reputation, loans, status, and now, control. You should have told me, I said. You would have said no. Yes, he looked up sharply. So you forced the decision instead. He didn't deny it. That was the first honest moment we'd had in weeks. Then he said something that chilled me. If this collapses, it's not just me who goes down. I held his gaze. Who else? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than any spreadsheet ever could. He wasn't alone in this. There was another investor, another name behind the pressure. And suddenly the road on Route 47 made more sense. And he wasn't just removing oversight. He was buying time. Time to cover someone else's exposure too. Walter stood up slowly. I'll give you 2 a minute, he said. As he walked away, my son leaned closer. You don't understand how deep this goes. Then help me understand, I said. He shook his head. If you push this, it gets bigger than family. I didn't blink. It already is. The waitress refilled our coffees. The world outside kept moving. Cars passing, people laughing. Ordinary life continuing while mine tilted on its axis. You kicked me out, I said quietly. You don't get to ask for blind trust now. He swallowed hard. For the first time, I saw fear, not of me, of what was coming. Because if I escalate, if I request a full forensic audit, if I involve the attorney beyond procedural holds, the investigation won't just look at him. It'll look at everyone tied to those transfers. And whoever's pressuring him, they won't be pleased. He stood up slowly. You always land on your feet, he muttered. That line again. But this time it sounded less like admiration and more like warning. As he walked out of the diner, Walter returned to the booth. Well, he asked. He's not alone, I said. Walter nodded like he already knew. Then you don't have 72 hours anymore, he said quietly. You've got leverage. And leverage, when used correctly, changes everything. The next morning, I didn't wait. And I called the estate attorney and used one word: audit. Not review, not clarification. Audit. Full forensic. Every transfer, every authorization, every IP address, every associated entity. When you say forensic, people start sweating because numbers don't argue. They testify. By noon, formal notices were issued, not just to my son, to every linked account tied to that restructuring attempt, including the secondary holding account and the external investor. That's when the name surfaced. Not a corporation, a person, Darren Cole, private lender, high-interest bridge financing, short-term capital injections. Translation: legal loan shark in a tailored suit. Walter didn't look surprised when I told him. He's been circling small contractors all year, he said. You know him. I've audited his fallout before. And suddenly, something clicked. You weren't just driving by that night, I said slowly. He held my gaze. No, he admitted. Silence sat between us. You were watching Darren. Yes. Now the pieces locked in. My son had taken a bridge loan to cover business losses during a downturn. High interest, aggressive terms, short repayment window. When revenue didn't rebound fast enough, Darren likely suggested creative liquidity. Move money temporarily, restructure assets, shift risk. And who had structured assets with clean liquidity? Me, the estate trust. You think Darren told him to get you out of the way? Walter asked. I think Darren told him to remove friction. And I was friction, oversight, delay, question marks. So my son did what desperate men do. He chose momentum over morality. The audit moved fast, because once estate attorneys smell exposure, they sprint. Within 48 hours, the findings were clear. Unauthorized digital credential use, intentional dual auth bypass attempt, linked financial pressure from an external high-interest lender. Nothing criminal yet, but dangerously close. And if executed, it would have crossed that line. My son showed up at the motel that night, not angry, not defensive, defeated. You escalated, he said quietly. You forced me to, I replied. He looked older, smaller somehow. You don't understand what that man would have done, he said. What? I asked. Sue you? He shook his head. Worse. Darren's contracts weren't violent. They were suffocating. Default clauses that seized equipment, forced asset liquidation, public liens, reputation killers. In small-town contracting, reputation is oxygen. So you gambled my security to protect yours, I said evenly. His silence was answer enough. Then he surprised me. I was going to put it back. Of course he was. They always are. Temporary, short-term, just until the market stabilizes, until the next payment clears, until the pressure eases. But temporary fraud is still fraud. Here's the twist, though. The audit didn't just protect me. It exposed Darren. Because when forensic reviews expand, They don't stop politely at the first door. They pull threads. And Darren had a pattern. Multiple contractors, similar restructuring tactics, a same timeline pressure. Walter's old reports suddenly mattered. His testimony mattered, which meant the stranger who picked me up that night wasn't random mercy. It was timing. If I'd stayed quiet, Darren would have won again. 2 weeks later, formal complaints were filed, not by me, by the attorney, because once professionals see systemic manipulation, they protect their license first. Darren's lending practices came under review, his contracts scrutinized. My son wasn't the only one sweating anymore. The trust was locked, resecured, multi-factor authentication added, manual verification required, my oversight reinstated permanently. But that wasn't the real resolution. The real moment came 3 days later. My son stood in the diner again. No anger this time, just clarity. I was scared, he admitted. There it was, not pride, not strategy, fear. I didn't want you to see me failing. That hit harder than the roadside did. You think I haven't failed before? I asked softly. He shook his head. You always land on your feet. That line again, but now I understood it differently. To him, I wasn't just his mother. I was stability, and he couldn't handle disappointing stability, so he removed it. I would have helped you, I said. You would have controlled it. No, I said gently. I would have protected you from yourself. Silence, then something unexpected. I'm sorry, he said. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just real. Here's the final twist. I didn't press charges. I didn't destroy his business. And I didn't ruin his name. The audit was enough. The exposure was enough. The fear in his eyes was enough. Sometimes accountability doesn't require annihilation. It requires interruption. Walter left town 2 days later. Before he did, he handed me a card. If you ever think something feels off, he said, trust the numbers. I smiled. I usually do. He nodded once. And trust yourself more than anyone else. Then he drove away. This time I wasn't stranded. My son and I are rebuilding, slowly, with boundaries, with transparency, with dual signatures that actually mean something. And here's what I know now. He didn't kick me out because he didn't love me. He kicked me out because he panicked. But panic reveals character. And sometimes the road you're left on is the road that saves you. Because if that stranger hadn't stopped, if I hadn't been displaced, the transfer would have cleared, the trust would have fractured, and my son would have crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He thought he left me with nothing, no money, no car, no plan. What he didn't realize, he left me with clarity, and clarity is far more dangerous than cash.